After the storm of a life lived in the heat of political controversy, there is a great calm. That is how the Bishop of London described Margaret Thatcher in a sermon at her funeral. Cassell, Bryan-Low, was actually in St. Paul's for the ceremony. Cassell, what was it like?
Well, it was an incredible concentration of political power under one roof. Here we have every British political figure that is still alive today that I've known growing up and all my life, as well as including the current cabinet, as well as dignitaries from around the world. There were 11 serving prime ministers from other countries, a couple of heads of state. So it was extraordinary, all under one roof.
And I understand there wasn't actually a eulogy at Mrs. Thatcher's own request.
Correct. So she had been involved with a lot of the plans. She'd chosen a lot of the hymns, and as you say, she'd requested no eulogy. But there was a sermon by the Bishop of London, and he remembered both the political figure as well as the private figure. He remembered the fact that she was a grandmother and a mother. He actually told one amusing anecdote. He said he was remembering her direct manner, and he says he remembered sitting next to her at a city function, and she'd been recalling her sort of religious influence on something, and she turned to him and said, "But don't eat the duck pate, Bishop, it's very fattening." And that caused the audience to laugh. So there were light moments as well.
I mean, okay, any funeral is a somber occasion, but I mean, I should imagine a funeral on that sort of scale must really have an atmosphere of its own.
Yes, certainly. There were sort of 2,300 people sitting in St. Paul's Cathedral, and there was silence as the coffin was brought in. So there was a very, as you say, sort of somber, sort of heavy tone to it.
Okay, there had been concerns here about some sorts of disturbances, either during the services or during the ceremonial procession to St. Paul's. What actually happened in the end in the streets?
Well, outside the cathedral, there were crowds. I don't have exact numbers of details, but certainly, big crowds, sometimes 10 deep, lining the streets. And for the most part, they were largely respectful. There were some banners sort of expressing anti-Thatcher views, and there were some sort of verbal chants, but for the most part, it was pretty respectful.
I mean, what's interesting as well, of course, is that part of Thatcher's family, despite the fact that this was not a state occasion, it's a ceremonial funeral, but her family was actually involved in the proceedings.
Indeed. So her children, Mark and Carol, were there, and her two grandchildren were there, and they were involved in the proceedings. They walked down the aisle ahead of the coffin as it proceeded into the church. And then her granddaughter, who's fairly young, but she made a very impressive reading. She could tell she was a bit nervous, but incredibly composed given her young age.
Taking after her grandmother, maybe. What's also, I mean, that wasn't the end of it. Basically, there is now going to be an actual private crematorium, so there'll be another service for Mrs. Thatcher.
Correct. So the coffin is being taken off, and ultimately this afternoon it will be taken to a crematorium in southwest London for private cremation. There's also, as we speak, there's a couple of receptions going on. One is being hosted at Guildhall nearby here, Medieval Hall, and that's for about 1,000 people. So that's mostly British figures. And then separately, the Foreign Office is hosting a reception for the foreign dignitaries.
So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.